The story I'm about to tell you isn't scary because I was in danger or because something directly happened to me, but because it reveals just how twisted and horrible the world can be, especially for children. It all happened in the summer of 1996 after a visit to my grandmother. I was on the highway near Meridian, Idaho, when I noticed a family hitchhiking on the side of the road. If it had just been a man, I would have driven on without hesitation. There are too many stories about hitchhiking gone wrong. But since it was a family with a very young girl, I felt there wouldn't be a problem. When I stopped the car and rolled down the window, I got a better look at them. The girl seemed out of place. Or rather, the parents seemed out of place. Almost delusional. They wore clothes that looked over 50 years old and worn out, and both had a frightened look in their eyes, as if they weren't used to being outside and everything was new to them. The girl, on the other hand, was dressed in modern clothes but was completely filthy, and her gaze was distant, like her mind was miles away. I hesitated, but I had already stopped the car. After all, they might be strange people, but I was probably strange too. I didn't exactly have a normal appearance, and I'm sure there are still people who think I look odd. Besides, they didn't seem to have much money and might need help. I asked them where they were headed, and they responded with a question. "Where are you going?" I said I was on my way to John Day, Oregon. They didn't even answer. They just opened the car doors and climbed in as quickly as they could. I remember finding it funny at the time. This crazy family stumbling into a stranger's car. Now that I know how it ends, it was anything but funny. We had been driving for about 10 minutes in silence when I decided to break the overwhelming quiet with some trivial questions, just to make things less awkward. Instead of easing the discomfort, it only intensified. They shut down all my attempts, responding only with yes or no, until I gave up and decided to stay quiet. It was better to focus on getting to the destination as quickly as possible and ending this social torture. That's when I started noticing the girl. She was young, looking no older than 11, but she was completely checked out. She hadn't opened her mouth once and showed no curiosity about the world around her. I began to think she might have some problem, maybe a mental delay, especially with the furtive way she glanced at me through the rearview mirror. As the road stretched ahead of us, I began to notice more disturbing details. The girl had marks on her wrists, like she'd been tied up recently. The mother, with her lost look, seemed to constantly hold the girl's arm, as if she feared she might run away at any moment. The father kept his hands on his knees, tense, staring straight ahead without blinking, as if he were watching something invisible. We finally passed a service station, and since I couldn't take it anymore, I announced I was going to stop for something to eat and to use the restroom. I needed time to think, and above all, try to see the girl's marks better. They were visibly alarmed by my suggestion to stop, but nodded in agreement. I parked the car and asked if they wanted anything. That's when the girl looked me straight in the eyes and said she wanted to go to the restroom. What happened next was alarming. The woman sitting next to her grabbed her arm and said she could only go to the restroom when they reached their destination. She was holding her so tightly that I could see the girl's skin turning white where she was squeezing. I couldn't handle it and insisted that it was better for her to go now, since we still had 2.5 hours to our destination. They were furious. I could see it on their faces, but fearing to raise suspicions, the woman reluctantly took the girl to the restroom, and the man stayed by the car. I was genuinely hungry, so I went into the station store to get something to eat. I had decided what I wanted but had to wait a bit because no one was there to ring me up. My eyes wandered to the bulletin boards until they froze in front of a photo. It was a missing child poster, the girl in my car. I was absolutely certain it was her. Her hair was different, dyed black, but the face was the same. My heart started pounding uncontrollably. The missing girl's name was Emily. She had disappeared 6 months ago from Ketchum, only a few hours from where we were. That poster confirmed all my doubts. Those people weren't her parents, but kidnappers, and she wasn't mentally delayed, just a terrified kid, probably coerced into staying silent. I realized I'd left my cell phone in the car, so I shouted to the store clerk that I needed to call the police immediately. He looked confused, but handed me the phone without question. On the other end, they gave me some instructions on how to act. Stay calm, don't confront them directly, pretend everything was fine. Basically, buy time until the police arrived. I wanted to stay inside the store a bit longer to create that time, but from that angle, I couldn't see the car, and fearing they might suspect something and run, I decided to go back to them and put on my best poker face. Good thing I didn't choose acting as a career. As soon as the man saw my face, he yelled to the woman, and they both started running. Fortunately, they left the girl behind. They probably realized everything, and just wanted to avoid getting caught by the police. I ran to the car and grabbed Emily, making sure she was safe. Her eyes showed deep relief, but also a fear I'll never forget. The police arrived in time and managed to arrest the couple. I found out later that she was about to be sold. For what? I don't know, and I don't want to know. That experience changed me profoundly. It showed me that evil can be hidden in the most unexpected places and in the most improbable people, and that sometimes we're called to intervene in ways we could never imagine. It was a stiflingly hot night. I was heading home after a job in the neighboring town. At that time, I was still figuring out what to do with my life. But since I needed to make money, I worked for an air conditioning repair company. It was rare for me to have to work late, but my coworker was sick, so my boss asked me to cover some of his shifts. The distance between the two towns was relatively short, but the road was completely deserted. On a good day, it took about 45 minutes to cover the distance. Everything was going great, but I was starting to feel a bit tired. I had slept poorly the night before, and the straight, monotonous road was super boring. I decided to stop for a few seconds, take a quick run to wake up, and then get back on the road. The problem was, the car wouldn't start again. I called the tow truck at least 10 times, but it was always an answering machine on the other end, and I was genuinely getting pissed off with the situation. I don't know how much time passed, maybe about 30 minutes, when I saw a truck approaching. I didn't signal for it to stop, but even so, it began to slow down and stopped a bit ahead of me. A man in his 40s got out of the truck and asked if everything was okay. My first impression of him was terrible. I don't know exactly what it was. It lasted just a fraction of a second, but I felt something was off about him. He got closer, and I could see his features a bit better. He was dressed in clothes much larger than his size and had a big mustache. Other than that, there was absolutely nothing particularly distinctive about him. He had an extremely ordinary face. I told him I was on the phone with the tow truck and that it should be arriving soon. I didn't want to give him a reason to continue the conversation. He asked if I had heard the radio announcement that everyone in the area should seek shelter because a storm was approaching. Once again, I found it very strange. Warnings were never given at the last minute, and although it was an area with very unstable weather and frequent summer storms, I already knew how to identify some of the signs. Nothing in the weather suggested a storm was coming. Anyway, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. I tried calling the tow truck again, but without any success. Now, I was truly getting angry. The man asked if I wanted a ride, but seeing my hesitation, he mentioned there was a gas station less than 30 minutes away by car, and that he could drop me off there if I wanted. I want to emphasize that I was a bit suspicious of the man's insistence, but I was tired, irritated by not getting a response from the tow truck, and I didn't want to spend a night there alone, especially with the possibility of a storm coming. I decided to accept. I gathered my things, wallet, and cell phone, and got into the truck. I asked him what he was transporting, and he replied that he wasn't carrying anything at the moment. He was just heading home after being away for 3 months. During the ride to the gas station, I felt uncomfortable a few times. We were making small talk, but even so, the man asked me strange, uncommon questions. Questions interspersed with strange, overly prolonged looks. He asked me things like if I was heading home, if there was anyone important in my life waiting for me, where I lived, and so on. I'm not great at small talk. In fact, I'm not great at any kind of conversation. I've always been a very reserved person without many friends. My social skills were not the best. But even so, those conversations made me uncomfortable. I didn't answer any of them directly. I didn't want to reveal anything about my life to that man. Anyway, no matter how uncomfortable I was, at that point, I had no choice but to continue answering vaguely and pray to reach the gas station quickly. He offered me water twice, even after I told him I wasn't thirsty. Then, finally, at the end of the road, I saw a luminous structure appear, the gas station. I can hardly put into words the feeling I had when I arrived and saw that it was one of those extremely small stations with no one working there. What was the man's idea of telling me he could give me a ride to the gas station if there was no one working there? That station, and the possibility of finding more people, were the only things that convinced me to get into the truck. Already furious with the situation, I confronted him directly, demanding to know what his plan was. Why had he lured me into the truck, knowing full well that the gas station would be deserted? I didn't care anymore about being polite or fair. It was clear that this guy was either very strange and had some serious issues, or had ulterior motives. He clearly got flustered but quickly composed himself and firmly told me I was being irrational, that he had only stopped to help me, and that if I wanted, I could stay there and wait for someone else to show up. We both knew the likelihood of someone else passing by was slim. We hadn't seen a single car or light along the way, and the road was rarely used. Now that I think back on the situation, I probably was an idiot. If I had thought about it before agreeing to go with him, I would have realized that the likelihood of someone working at the gas station was slim. I decided to ignore my instincts and apologized. Maybe the man was just a strange person with good intentions, and I was seeing things that weren't there. Big mistake. I never ignored my instincts again after that night. And if there's one thing you can take away from this story, it's to never ignore yours. Even if you think you might be wrong, it's better to be wrong and unfair to someone than to risk something serious happening to you. At this point, I asked him if he minded if I used the bathroom. He said no, and that he would take the opportunity to eat something. The reality is that I didn't need to use the bathroom. I just needed space to think. As soon as I rounded the corner of the gas station, and the man lost sight of me, he ran to the back of the truck. He didn't even try to hide or wait for me to enter the bathroom. I stayed put, and as soon as the back door of the truck opened, I heard voices. Now I was panicking. Up until that point, I thought I was alone with the man. He hadn't told me there was anyone else. I felt confident in my physical ability to confront that man if necessary, but with two men, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I decided to peek, and not seeing anyone in sight, I approached the truck to try to figure out if the person inside was a man and what they would say to each other without me present. I decided to use the bushes for cover. If one of them appeared, they wouldn't see me right away. I was getting near the truck when I heard the man who gave me a ride say, "This one will do." I didn't need to hear anything more for my instincts to kick into action. I started running as fast as I could. The area around the road and the gas station was dry and arid, like a desert, so I couldn't hide easily. The only option was to keep running until I could no longer see the lights of the station and the truck. And that's exactly what I did. I think I must have run at full speed for over 15 minutes. I made sure I wasn't being followed and then relaxed behind some large rocks. I spent the night there, wide awake and thinking about what could have happened to me. I don't know what those men were planning for me, but I know it wasn't anything good. So once again, I repeat, if someone is too insistent with you, too nice, and at the same time, gives you strange vibes, listen to your instincts. I never thought that a trip that started with so much enthusiasm could turn into one of the worst nightmares of my life. My name is Jake, and I'm here to tell you the story of how my best friend Tom and I had a terrifying experience while hitchhiking across the United States. Tom and I had just finished college and decided we deserved an adventure before diving into adult life and its accompanying responsibilities. We planned a hitchhiking trip along the iconic Route 66, starting in Chicago and ending in Los Angeles. I know you're probably thinking that hitchhiking wasn't the best idea, and after what happened, I agree. But back then, I knew plenty of young people who did it. And even though I'd heard some disturbing stories, we were two young adventurers who felt we had prepared well enough. We were excited about meeting new people, discovering stories, and seeing the breathtaking landscapes of our country. The first few days were everything we had hoped for, and more. We met friendly truck drivers, traveling families, and even a group of bikers who took us along a stretch of the road while sharing their travel stories and experiences. We posted photos and updates on social media, and our friends and family followed our adventure with interest. At a certain point, deep in the heart of Arizona, we had trouble getting a new ride. The sun was setting, and the road seemed more deserted than ever. Finally, after nearly an hour of waiting, an old, worn-out car stopped. The driver was a middle-aged man with a tired but friendly look. His name was Hank. "Where are you headed?" he asked with a smile that seemed sincere, though a bit odd. "We're on our way to Los Angeles," Tom replied. "Anywhere westward helps." "Hop in. I'll take you as far as I can," Hank said. We got into the car, relieved to have finally found a ride. At first, Hank seemed normal, asking us about our trip, where we were from, and what we hoped to see in California. But as the journey continued, the conversation took a darker turn. Hank started talking about the dangers of the road and mentioned a series of mysterious disappearances in the area. He spoke of people who were last seen hitchhiking and were never found again. At this point, the conversation was genuinely becoming strange. He didn't seem particularly concerned with warning two young men about the dangers of hitchhiking. Instead, he seemed focused on provoking genuine fear in us. It appeared to give him some kind of pleasure. "You know this is dangerous, right?" Hank said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You never know who might pick you up." Tom and I exchanged uneasy glances. The air inside the car felt heavier, and the atmosphere became oppressive. I tried to steer the conversation to something lighter, but Hank insisted on horror and mystery stories. We began to feel we had made a mistake getting into that car. As night fell, Hank veered off the main road onto a secondary path, claiming to know a shortcut that would save us time. Purely on instinct, I said we could get out right there, that we'd find another ride going in our direction. But he insisted, told us not to worry, and didn't even slow down the car. The road became narrower and bumpier, and the trees around seemed to close in on us as if trying to prevent our passage. My phone's GPS stopped working, and the signal disappeared. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. At this point, I panicked and remember gripping Tom's arm tightly. I wanted him to understand that at any moment, we might need to act. I asked if he was sure we were heading in the right direction, trying to sound as casual as possible. I didn't want him to notice any hint of fear in my voice. What I didn't know at the time is that predators are used to this, to noticing the slightest sign of fear. He smiled, a terrifying smile, and told me to relax. After some time, Hank stopped the car next to an old, seemingly abandoned house. We asked why we had stopped, and he simply asked if we had ever explored an abandoned house. Tom and I looked at each other, panic rising inside us. We both understood we were in danger, and that the only way out of the situation was to play along until the right moment to escape presented itself. In the worst-case scenario, there were two of us, and only one of him. If necessary, I was more than ready to fight for my life. I smiled at the man, trying to reassure him, and with a nod, we got out of the car. The house was even more frightening up close, with broken windows and a sense of abandonment that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Hank was already ready to open the door when he looked back and, with another of those smiles, asked if we were ready to start the best adventure of our lives. Tom smiled too, said yes, and moved closer to him. What happened next was so quick that if Tom hadn't explained it to me later, I wouldn't have fully understood what happened. I was panicking, and my instincts were somewhat dulled, but not Tom's. Tom positioned himself right behind Hank, and as soon as he turned to open the door, Tom grabbed him by the neck and slammed his head against the still-closed door with all his strength. The door was so weak that it broke, and the last image I have before Tom shouted at me and I started running was seeing Hank hanging on the door with his head through the wood. I genuinely thought we had killed him during that entire run. I don't know how long we ran, but it was quite a while. We only stopped when we felt we were far enough. So we decided to rest there for a bit, and then continue. We needed to find the main road quickly. Out there in the middle of nowhere, we were completely unprotected. The only thing I had with me was my wallet and phone. Tom had the same. We had left everything else behind in the car. Then we realized that a car was driving up and down the road. Tom peeked out but assured me it wasn't Hank's car. It was much more modern. Then the car stopped right in front of where we were hiding, and a man asked, "Going somewhere, my dears?" My blood froze. It wasn't Hank, but he was clearly another predator. They were working together, and this man had come looking for us. Without thinking twice, we started running again. My mind was racing. How had he seen us? We were well hidden. We had taken all precautions. I was exhausted, but with all that adrenaline, my body didn't even complain. It just kept running. Finally, we reached a main road and saw car lights in the distance. We signaled frantically, and the car stopped, the driver looking at us with surprise. We didn't know if this man was also involved, but we had no choice. The other man was still behind us, and we knew what awaited us if he caught up. The man was clearly apprehensive. If I were in his situation, I would be too. But seeing us utterly terrified, he let us in and sped away while we explained what had just happened. When we reached the nearest town, we went straight to the police. We told them everything, from meeting Hank to our desperate escape. Our main stroke of luck was having Hank's car license plate. It was something I had discovered online while preparing for that trip. Before getting into a stranger's car, always record the license plate and send it to someone you trust. The police launched an investigation, and upon searching the house where we had been, they found evidence of multiple crimes. Hank, who we then discovered was actually named Richard, had been a predator for years, using the deserted road to pick up victims. The worst part was never finding out the identity of the second man. Richard refused to give up his identity, even when offered a reduced sentence in exchange for information. 2 years have passed, and we still have no answers. Tom and I survived, but the experience left deep scars. To this day, we struggle to trust people. We are always on alert, and our friendship was never the same. What were once happy memories are now completely tainted by those men.